unfolding on almost the last part of the Maimer, page Zion. We were talking about the idea of the Paraduma is to deal with Gimel Klip Satmeis in a similar way. That's why it was brought outside of the Gimel Machnes, outside of the Sholosh Machnes. Let's learn, since we're probably going to have a little bit extra time today, let's learn the commentary on the side, on page Kazayin, that it talks over there about why and in what way the mitzvah of Paraduma has to do with being mevarer the Gimel Klip Satmeis. So it's the Bir B'derech Efsher, the commentary on the side, on page Tazayin, on the right side of the page, line 4 in the Bir. So he says, Kimavur b'Kabbalah v'Chassidus, ha'klippas, ha'koiches v'mechutz l'kedusha, ha'mechasas al ha'od alaki, kishem sha'klippa mechas al ha'prin. Okay, that's a little bit. Let's get down line 10. I'm sorry, he's giving like a whole introduction about klippas, what they are. Let's go to line 10. Line 10, the Bir. B'geres ha'kodesh b'sefer HaTanya, ka'karbonos hanasim b'fnim mevarim es klippas noiga. Those karbonos that were offered inside of the Beis HaMikdash, those are their birur is to elevate klippas noiga, and we see it because the primary thing what the karbonos were brought from inside the Beis HaMikdash for Avedas were primarily for Avedas that were done b'shoigig. Avedas b'mezid you did not bring a carbon for. So for example, if a person ate chelav b'shoigig, he ate non-kosher fast b'shoigig, he was machal Shabbos b'shoigig, etc. So when he did different things unintentionally, so unintentional Avedas, that a person brought a carbon chatas for, and that was brought inside the Beis HaMikdash. On the other hand, the Paraduma is also called mei chatos. It's also called an idea of a chatos, which means it's also about something having to do with a negative, but that's brought outside. So let's see it in further in the Bir B'derech Efsher, line 12. The ilu Paraduma nasis b'chutz, as opposed to the Paraduma that's made outside. In other words, it's not made within the Beis HaMikdash. But aheres umevareres tuma shalamata matam klippas noiga. It cleanses and refines a tumah that's way lower than klippas noiga. Kimavur sham, like it's explained over there in the Geras HaKodesh, that it brings from the Zohar noida mezohar HaKodesh v'Arizal. It's known from the Zohar HaKodesh and Arizal soida karbonos shal gaba mezbeach. That the secret of the karbonos, the inner meaning, the mystery of the karbonos that's brought on the mizbeach, meaning the karbonos that are inside the Beis HaMikdash, heim bechinas halos mayin nukvim menefsha b'hamis shebenoiga al shorshan mekoyrim. That's halos mayin nukvim is another term for bringing up the feminine waters. That's a term for esrus dolosat, from the nefsha b'hamis of klippas noiga to their root and source, because Dalad Chayes Merkava, the 4 beasts of the divine chariot, Hanoisis Sakise, that carried the divine throne, the oxen face, the eagle's face, the lion's face, etc. So the animal down here is the animal that's brought on the back down here is about the Nefsha Bahamis being brought upwards and elevated and refined to its source after it became involved in an Aveda B'Shoigig in Klippas Noiga. Because the Alter Rebbe goes on over there to explain that the idea of something done unintentionally is a result of the hisgabrus of the Nefesh Bahamis. An Aveda that I do intentionally, so then a person crossed over then into the realm of Shalosh Ksat Meis because the item or the aveda, etc., comes from shalosh psat and so on. But if the person did it unintentionally, how did it come about that a yid who's from the level of kedusha can be connected with something unintentionally? That's klippa. That's a result of these gabras of nefshabamis from klippas noig. So an unintentional aveda has to do with klippas noig, and that's what has to be elevated. What we have to refine and elevate is the klippas noig. But as opposed to that, line 21 in the commentary, when the Bora Adum is burnt up, through the throwing in the eitz eres, the cedar wood, and the special type of grass, herb, and placing the spring water onto the ashes, nikra b'shem kiddush b'mechatos b'mishnah. The Mishnah uses the term kiddush mechatos. Why do we use the word kiddush mechatos? Sanctifying it. What's the idea of sanctification? What's the kiddush over here? So the word kodesh and kedusha has to do with a drawing down of a very high level. It's talking about the supernal holiness, meaning a level of holiness that's way beyond Seder Ishtalshalos. And because it comes from such a high level, it is so holy, it's Kiddush Mechatos. Because of that, it could reach down so low. Therefore, it's able to purify someone that was tummy because of contact with a dead body. Even though a dead body is considered the avi avois hatuma. There are things that are called avois hatuma, the fathers of tuma, and then there's avi avois hatuma, the grandfather. In other words, the source of all the worst type of tuma. That's the contact with a dead body. Well, the mata minoiga, which indicates that's way lower than klippas noiga, like we mentioned yesterday, that the whole idea of death is a result of Avedis. Avedis have to do with Shalosh Psat, and the future removal of death will be because klippas will be removed from this earth. Therefore, since klippas will be removed from this earth, so the Avedis will be refined, Avedis will be done away with. Since Avedis will be done away with, so the resulting death will be done away with as well. So on a minor scale, every single time we are mitaher someone from tumas mes, when we purify someone through the para aduma from coming in contact with a dead body, it means we are taking on and we are refining and we are elevating the idea and the concept, the level of shalosh klipsat meis. So this is all a connection with what we were talking about with Zois Chukas HaTorah, that the Chukas HaTorah means that it's not just any type of level of engraving, but it's an engraving that's through and through, meaning that it's thoroughly touches the essence of the person, and because it completely connects with the essence of the person, so therefore the essence is to be found in everything, so therefore that essence permeates even to the level of the intellect, that the intellect reflects and is in concert with the Kabbalah's oil, and therefore the way he does it is in such a way of simcha and chayis, because it's not something that he feels that he's being coerced to do. He feels completely identified with it. And we explained that this is these two aspects of the para aduma, the rotziv v'shoiv that we spoke about at the beginning of the Maimer, is similar to the noichach pnei oil moyed, the fact that he has to be facing the oil moyed, the highest, most level. That's the level of Kabbalah's oil that's completely above and beyond my intellect, and yet it has to be shoiv. It has to come down into intellect. Where does it come down into intellect? In the para aduma. In the para aduma, it comes down into intellect that lo yahader achara, that he totally sublimates his intellect, that he shouldn't even think about it. Derech Hagav, in a different Maimer, I'm not sure if I mentioned this previously, the Rebbe has a very interesting diuk in the Lashon, Ein lecha reshus laharer achareh. The Rebbe says the simple meaning of when we say Ein lecha reshus laharer achareh, you have no permission to think about it, means his will and his Kabbalah soil, like we say over here, is so strong that he perceives that it's prohibited for him to start like figuring out and saying, well, it doesn't make sense, and this doesn't make sense, and that doesn't make no. Then, but the Rebbe in this Maimer from Parshas Chukas, Tavshim Mem Ches, says an interesting thing. He says that the word reshus doesn't just mean permission, but it means free choice, free will. The Rebbe brings from the Rambam, where the Rambam says in Hilchos Tshuva that a reshus nitna la'adam, that the person was given reshus, whether to follow Torah mitzvahs or whether or not. And the Rebbe is medayik from the Lashon, the exact language of the Rambam, that you see from the usage of the Rambam's Lashon of the word reshus, that reshus means freedom of choice. It means free will. It doesn't just mean permission, you're allowed to. The Rambam is not saying you have permission, you're allowed to do this or you're allowed to do that. It means you have the free will. So when the Rebbe says an amazing word, when it says, Ein lecha reshus laharer achareh, it doesn't just mean you don't have permission, it's prohibited, but you don't even have the free will to think other than what the Kabbalah's oil wants. Meaning that a Yid, by his very nature, the Nefesh by his very nature, doesn't even want to go there, to use the intellect to somehow challenge the Kabbalah's oil. The Rebbe says that if we do find that a person's intellect does go over there, that's because Yitzrei Ansai, it's not even the Nefesh Abamis, it's lower than that, it's the Yetzer Hara, whatever. But the Rebbe gives like this new spin on Ein lecha reshus lahar achareh. You don't, a Yid doesn't even by nature want to go ahead and use his intellect in a way that's against the Kabbalah soil, because like we said before, Zois chukas ha-Torah, that even the level of Torah, even the level of intellect, even the seichel part of the mitzvahs, the understanding part of the mitzvahs, the learning part of the mitzvahs, even that is permeated with chukah, with a level of hakika me'aver through and through. And since there's a hakika me'aver la'aver through and through, therefore even my mind fits in concert with the will of the neshama to be connected entirely with the Eibush. Okay, so now the last part of Maimer, the Rebbe is going to connect this with Yud Beis Tammuz. This upcoming week, this upcoming Monday in Merz Hashem is going to be Yud Beis Tammuz. Top of page Zayin, Oy Zayin. Yeah, Shloimar could say Shezoi Gama Shayches the Parshas Chukas L'Chag Hagula Yud Beis Tammuz. This is also the connection between the Parsha of Chukas to the Yom Tov of Redemption of the Frierdiker Rebbe took place on the 12th of Tammuz. Shalchein Koyre Noisa V'Kama V'Kama Shonim B'Shabbos. The name is Baruch and Kol Yom Shalifnei Yud Beis Tammuz. Many years we read Parshas Chukas, the Shabbos prior to Yud Beis Tammuz, which the Zohar says the Shabbos that's prior to the week brings down the blessing and the brachas for that entire week. So therefore, in other words, already on the Shabbos that we're reading Parshas Chukas, it's already the blessings inherent, the brachas for Yud Beis Tammuz are already there in that Shabbos when he's reading Parshas Chukas. And the Rebbe goes on to say, and if it's not close to Yud Beis Tammuz, at least it has the connection, it's close to the 3rd of Tammuz on other years. So therefore, what's the significance of Gimel Tammuz? Shaz is Chila Geula, because that's when the redemption began. That's when he was led out of prison and sent to exile. He was given freedom from imprisonment to only have to go into exile. And in other places, actually, the Rebbe emphasizes that really after the fact, after analysis, we see that Gimel Tammuz is in a certain way greater than Yud Beis Tammuz, because Yud Beis Tammuz, he only went from exile to total freedom. But Gimel Tammuz, he went from a possibility of being Chas v'Sholom Hepech HaChaim, the opposite of life, to being given his life back. So it's really, in a certain degree, Gimel Tammuz is even a greater sin. So either way, Chukas has to do with the Chag HaGeula of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Either it's close to Gimel Tammuz, or it's closer to Yud Beis Tammuz. But to such a degree, Gamba Maimer Yud Beis Tammuz Arishan, then the first Yud Beis Tammuz of 1927, when the Frierdiker Rebbe was first released, like we mentioned earlier in Ois Dal the Maimer, that the Frierdiker Rebbe brought the Rashi's explanation as Zois Chukas Torah. So we see again this connection between Yud Beis Tammuz and Parshas Chukas. So what is the down-to-earth connection? Why is Parshas Chukas connected with the Geula of the Frierdiker Rebbe? So it says in line 11, the idea behind this is, as it's known, that my master, my father-in-law, the one whose simcha and geula it is, he was permeated his entire days, his entire lifetime in the avodah of self-sacrifice in actuality. Now, there's well-known stories going back even when the Frierdiker Rebbe was a child, when he came to the defense of a butcher over there in the village that was arrested, even though he was innocent and accused of stealing someone's animal, etc., etc. And afterwards, it turned out that it was actually a police officer that had stolen it. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was actually thrown in jail as a child. And the Frierdiker Rebbe went through 7 imprisonments because of what he stood up for, whether under the Tsar's regime he was imprisoned, or whether under the communists he was imprisoned multiple times. The Rebbe says in other places that other Gedolei Yisrael had, said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, or had disagreed with the Frierdiker Rebbe's method. And they said there's only certain things that you're supposed to be obligated to go on Mesiras Nefesh. There's only the big 3, Avodah Zarah, because Darim, Gilei Arayos, that a person has to do Mesiras Nefesh. Not on all these things that you're doing Mesiras Nefesh. You have Mesiras Nefesh on building mikvahs, you have Mesiras Nefesh on teaching Torah to children, etc., etc. And they were challenging on it and saying, what are you doing this Mesiras Nefesh? And even more so, the Frierdiker Rebbe, there's the famous story that Rebbe always often brings down, and there's a whole sikha about it that the Rebbe actually connects it with Parshas Chukas, that the Rebbe speaks about how the Frierdiker Rebbe had self-sacrifice, Mesiras Nefesh, not to travel on Shabbos. That the Frierdiker Rebbe was told on Thursday, which was Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, that you will be going to Kasramah, you'll be going to exile for 3 years. We're going to let you out of prison today, Thursday. You have 6 hours to get your affairs in order, and then at night you have to report, or in the evening you have to report to the train, and you will take the train to Kasramah, to your exile. The Frierdiker Rebbe asked, and when is the train arriving? So he was told the train is going to arrive on Shabbos. The train is going to arrive on Shabbos. What? I'm not going on that train. So they told him, if you're not going on that train, then you're going to stay here in jail. Forget about going to exile for 3 years. You'll just stay over here. And they had the power to do this. You know, this wasn't an idle threat that they were stuck by the bureaucracy and had to send them out. And the Rebbe says, all of this makes no sense. Where do you see it? You have to have, first of all, Mesiras Nefesh for not being Machal Shabbos, that he's risking staying in prison, and what they could do to him in prison, they could even take his life again in prison. You know, prisons in Russia is not is much worse than prisons as we know about it here in America, and so on and so forth. Even though here in America, it's also not the safest place to be in prison. But for sure in Russia, it wasn't a safe place for him to stay in prison. And also, who said that he would end up being on the train? He could, in the meantime, leave the prison. In other words, he refused to leave the prison. They told him, you have now a 6-hour furlough to get your affairs into order. Says he should have taken the furlough and then argued with them about it. No, he said, I'm staying here in prison. I'm not going to leave the prison walls. Maybe in those 6 hours, they'd be able to be brought pressure, etc., that he'd be able to take a later train and not have to travel on Shabbos. No. That was not on the program. And of course, the whole idea of standing up to them and telling them, I am Shabbos observant. I am not going to do something that's going to be Mechal Shabbos. That was like, sticking it in their face to go just against what they're standing for. And even getting off of the train on Shabbos, it's only a Shaila and Isut Chumin, which is only a Drabanan. So he's being Moiser Nefesh, literally risking his life not to be over on Isut Drabanan on Shabbos, but you don't even have to be Moiser Nefesh with Shabbos Bechlal, even on Isut Daraisa. So we see that his entire being, the Rebbe says, was permeated with Mesiras Nefesh. So that's Bechlal, has to do with the idea of Chukah, the Rebbe says in other places, because Yiddishkeit and Torah mitzvahs were not something separable from him. It wasn't like ink on paper, and it wasn't even like engraved letters on the surface, but it was engraved through and through, and therefore he and Torah mitzvahs could not be separated. But in addition to that, the Rebbe is saying here in our Maimer, the Chiddush, that we have both extremes. There is the Kabbalah's oil, and that Kabbalah's oil needs to permeate. Ratzoi and Shoy. It is reaching to the highest and coming down to the lowest. So therefore, it has to be both concepts, it has to be both ideas together. Where do we see that? So the Ratzoi part we see from the Mesiras Nefesh of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that the Frierdiker Rebbe had the self-sacrifice for the Eibishter and for Torah mitzvahs. But then the Rebbe goes on in line 13, and along with his self-sacrifice, he wasn't in such a way that he was like, some people do crazy things, but they're not settled, they're not down to earth. The Frierdiker Rebbe, with being like out of this world in the Mesiras Nefesh, everything was settled, everything was organized, everything was put together. Even the great service that I work in spreading Torah and strengthening Yiddishkeit, that because of that, that's why he was imprisoned before Yud Beis Tammuz. Though it was totally irrational, so super rational, to go ahead and stand against this powerful regime that spread over the entire, Soviet Union. It didn't even fit in with the intellect of Kedusha, like we said before, that many Gedolei Yisrael over there said that you don't have an obligation to risk your life for all these different things. The Mesiras Nefesh, it came in a revealed way from the perspective of the Avodah. That's a self-sacrifice completely beyond the limitations of intellect. Afal became still in all. It was still the Frierdiker Rebbe had this. He wasn't like jumping around. Everything was organized. Everything was set in place. Even though the nature of a person is at the time that he's in a movement of self-sacrifice, he has no room for calculations and being organized. He's like all over the place. It was thought through, it was set up, in such a way that spreading Torah and strengthening Yiddishkeit was in the greatest way possible, to such a degree that the Frierdiker Rebbe kept track of all the places where there was necessary to send Malamdim, and where it was necessary to build mikvahs and strengthen other parts of Yiddishkeit. And when Chas v'Sholom, which often happened, that the Russians captured someone and caught a Malamed, so the Frierdiker Rebbe was on top of it. City B, village A doesn't have a Malamed, we got to send somebody right out there. Everything was very organized by him. Why? Because of this Rotzi and Shoiv together, like we said before. When it's the Etzem permeates even the intellect, that even the Mesiras Nefesh comes down into Seichel. Line 26, according to what it says in Pirush Rashi at the end of our parsha, it says over there, concerning Moshe sending the malachim, the messengers to the people that he was going to conquer. So he says, Rashi says that who sent it? Was it Moshe that sent it? Was it Eden that sent it? The pasuk says one thing, comes out a different thing. So he says, Moshe, who Yisrael, hey Moshe, that he says Moshe is the Jewish people, and the Jewish people is Moshe. Loy marlach, to tell you, that the leader of the generation is like the entire generation, because the Nasi is everything. Let's look at an interesting point that he says in footnote 40. The Rebbe says like this, to tell you this thing, Rashi is trying to explain why it seems that either Moshe sent the messengers or the Eden sent. How do we fit it together? You know what? How do we fit it together? Hanasi Wakoil. Fine. But why does it have to tell you? You know why the pasuk teaches you this? To teach you this message that Hanasi Wakoil. Why does it have to tell you this in Pshutish Mikra that it's coming to teach you this message? But the Rashi is explaining why did the pasuk change it around? Loy malach, shazel loy malach is to tell you and inform you. Koil gam ben chamish, even a 5-year-old that's learning chumash. He came to the pashtus agdvarim that this is the normal thing, this is the simple matter. Uba oilam ha'asiyah gashmi, and in this physical world, leumas pshat shebetoira, which the physical world corresponds to the level of pshat. There's Remez, it's connected Yitzida, Drush is connected Abriya, Kabbalah is connected Asiya, etc. The footnote on the next page, Shenasi Hador Chulu, Al Pizeh. Okay, we'll stop over here. Let's go back to the text. So it goes on line 1 on the top of the next page, Yud Zayin, moving, it's understood. This empowerment, my father-in-law, gives over l'chol b'nei Yisrael to all Yidden, that we should have this ultimate mesiras nefesh, and it should permeate our minds, permeate our koiches pnimim, because since the Nasi is one with us, even someone that is called by the name Yisrael, the Rebbe by many Fabrengens used to say, Yichune could also mean from the word nickname, that the person doesn't even look at it as his real name. He looks at it as a nickname, a negative connotation, something that he doesn't like necessarily. So even a Yid that looks at it as a name Jew, as something foreign to him, the Frierdiker Rebbe empowers him, when we will go in the way that he paved for us. Yeshna Avtacha, we have the promise for Yekuyim Mashakasav, it will be fulfilled what it says, Yehi Hashem Elokeinu Imanu, that Hashem will be with us. Kasher Hoyim Aviseinu, like he was with our forefathers. Ayazveinu Vayichenu, he will not desert us, he will not leave us, which is the pasuk that the Frierdiker Rebbe quoted at the train station on the way going to exile. And to all Jewish people will be light both spiritually and physically. Any questions?